"You'll be at table 12, near the catering station." The wedding coordinator said it like she was doing me a favor. My daughter-in-law Victoria smiled that cold smile of hers. "We can't have your background embarrassing my colleagues." My son Gregory just looked down at his shoes. Didn't say a word to defend his old man. Name's Vincent Patterson, though most folks call me Vince. I'm 58, been a widower for 4 years now. Spent 35 years as a foreman at the Ford plant in Dearborn before they shut us down. Raised Greg on my own after his mother Helen passed from cancer. Thought I did a decent job of it, but standing there in my best suit, the one I wore to Helen's funeral, I felt about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. The wedding was at some fancy country club on the north side of Detroit called Brookshire Manor. The kind of place where they charge you $20 for a sandwich and act like they're doing you a favor. Victoria's family, the Sinclairs, owned half the law firms in the city. Her father Richard was a retired judge. Her mother Patricia ran in those charity circles where they spend more on one dinner than I made in a month at the plant. I walked to my assigned table, past the photographers, past the flower girls practicing their walk, past tables full of people in suits that cost more than my monthly pension check. Table 12 was right next to where they stored the extra chairs and the dirty dishes. The smell of leftover shrimp cocktail and warm champagne hung in the air. The other folks at my table, security guards on their break, and catering staff grabbing a quick bite between courses. Up front, I could see the Sinclair family table. Crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds, white roses arranged just so silverware that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. They kept glancing back at me and whispering. I heard one of Patricia's friends say loud enough for me to catch, "Is that really the groom's father? I heard he worked in a factory his whole life." Another one laughed behind her hand. Poor Gregory must be so embarrassed. I sat there in my metal folding chair, straightening the tie Helen had bought me for our 25th anniversary. The one with little blue flowers, she said, brought out my eyes. Tried to pretend it didn't sting like hell. This was my son's wedding day. I'd saved up for 2 years to help pay for it. Even sold Helen's wedding ring to contribute to the down payment on their house. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to do that, but I wanted Greg to start his marriage right, and they stuck me in the back like I was something to be ashamed of. That's when the chair next to me scraped across the floor. A man sat down, minus silver hair, expensive suit, but he moved like someone who'd worked with his hands. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Something about the way he held his shoulders, the calluses on his fingers when he reached for his water glass. "Looks like they put us working folks in the cheap seats," he said, with a grin that reminded me of someone I used to know. I was about to ask who he was when I heard his voice. Really heard it. That slight rasp from too many years of shouting over machinery. The way he said working folks with just a hint of pride instead of shame. I knew that voice from when we were kids running around the old neighborhood on the east side, getting into trouble, dreaming about what we'd do when we grew up. Tom Bradley, I nearly choked on the words. "Hey there, Vince. Been a long time. Tom Bradley. We'd grown up 3 blocks apart, went to the same high school. Cass Technical, where they taught you a trade alongside regular classes. His family moved away our senior year when his dad got laid off from Chrysler. Last I heard, Sam had gone into construction down south, but here he was, 40 years later, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car was worth. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice down. Well, Sam said, checking his watch, a Rolex that caught the light just right. "I own the building where Victoria's law firm leases their offices. Got an invitation through business channels, thought I'd see what all the fuss was about." I stared at him like he'd just told me he'd landed on the moon. "You own their building, among others." Construction business worked out pretty well for me. He glanced around the reception area, taking in the fancy decorations, the string quartet, the ice sculptures shaped like swans. Though I gotta say, this is quite a production for someone who can't even seat her father-in-law with the family. The words hit me harder than I expected. All morning I'd been telling myself it wasn't personal, just logistics, seating arrangements. But hearing Sam say it out loud made it real. Made it clear that this wasn't about space or convenience. This was about shame. Helen would have had something to say about this. I muttered more to myself than to Sam. "Your wife? I remember her from the old neighborhood, always stood up for people." Yeah, she did. My throat got tight thinking about it. Helen never met a bully she wouldn't face down. Used to tell Greg that how you treat people when nobody's watching is what shows your real character. Up front, the ceremony was starting. Greg stood at the altar looking nervous in his rented tux. He'd wanted to buy one, but I'd talked him into renting to save money for the honeymoon. Now I wondered if I'd made him feel cheap in front of Victoria's family. The thought made my stomach turn. Victoria came down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that. The kind of beautiful that makes men do stupid things. but when her eyes swept over the crowd during her walk, they passed right over me like I wasn't even there. Like the man who'd raised her husband was invisible. "Your boy looks good up there," Sam said quietly. "Yeah, when he remembers who raised him." The words came out more bitter than I intended, but I couldn't take them back. During the ceremony, I noticed people starting to look our way, not the pitying glances from before, but curious ones. A woman in a feathered hat whispered to her husband, "Who's that man with the groom's father? He looks important." I saw Richard Sinclair crane his neck to get a better look at us, his judge's instincts probably kicking in. Sam caught me watching. Funny how a little context changes things, isn't it? The minister was talking about love and commitment, about how marriage is built on mutual respect and support. I thought about Helen lying in that hospital bed, telling me to make sure Greg knew he was loved no matter what. "Don't let him forget where he came from, Vince," she'd whispered. "Don't let success make him forget the people who helped him get there." I'd promised her I wouldn't. Sitting there at table 12, watching my son avoid looking in my direction, I felt like I'd failed her completely. After the vows during the cocktail hour, Sam excused himself to make some phone calls. I wandered around, nursing a beer that tasted like water, listening to conversations I wasn't part of. Victoria's law school friends clustered near the bar, talking about cases and clients and billable hours. Patricia's charity circle discussed fundraising goals and society events. Nobody talked to the factory foreman eating shrimp cocktail in the corner. That's when I overheard something interesting. Two young lawyers from Victoria's firm were standing near the gift table, and they didn't know who I was. One of them looked nervous, kept checking over his shoulder. "Did you see the SEC inquiry letter that came in last week?" The nervous one said, his voice barely above a whisper, about the Brennan Industries case. "Yeah, that timing was weird as hell. I'm telling you, something's not right with how Victoria handled that client portfolio. Those trades happened right after our strategy meetings, like someone knew exactly what we were planning." "Keep your voice down, man. You know what happened to the last junior associate who asked too many questions about Victoria's cases. What happened? Let's just say he's not working in corporate law anymore." I filed that information away and found Sam near the champagne fountain finishing up a phone conversation. He looked satisfied about something. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Just business." "Say, Vince, what do you know about your daughter-in-law's work?" "Not much." "Some big corporate law firm downtown. She makes good money." "That's about all Greg tells me." "Why?" Sam nodded thoughtfully. "Sinclair and Associates." "Yeah, I know them. They handle a lot of real estate deals for developers around the city. My property management company deals with them regularly." The reception started, and they called everyone to their tables. As we sat down to dinner, chicken that looked fancy but tasted like cardboard, I watched Greg at the head table. Every few minutes he'd glance over at us with this puzzled look on his face, like he couldn't figure out why Sam was there. Victoria kept whispering in his ear, but she looked worried now instead of smug. Her confident smile from earlier had tightened around the edges. "So what's your story, Sam? How'd you go from our old neighborhood to owning office buildings?" Sam cut into his chicken, taking his time before answering. "Started small. Got a construction job in Alabama right after high school, saved every penny. Helen's wedding was the last time I saw you actually. Remember that? You looked so happy." "Best day of my life," I said, and meant it. "What happened after that?" "Worked construction crews in Alabama, then Georgia. Lived in a trailer for 10 years, ate bologna sandwiches for lunch every day. But I saved everything, bought equipment, hired good people. After 20 years, I had enough to start buying properties instead of just building on them." He took a sip of wine. "What about you? How'd you end up staying at Ford so long?" "Started there right after Helen and I got married. She was pregnant with Greg, needed steady work with benefits. Figured I'd stay a year or two, then do something else. Next thing I knew, 35 years had gone by. I shrugged. Can't say I regret it. Good honest work. Raised a decent kid, or thought I did. Your boy's just confused right now. Happens when you marry into money. They make you feel like you have to choose sides, like where you came from is something to be ashamed of. Helen used to say that shame is just fear wearing fancy clothes. She'd know what to do here. Tell me about her." I smiled, the first real smile I'd had all day. Helen was a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital. Worked the cancer ward for 25 years before the cancer got her too. Funny how that works sometimes. I paused, remembering. She had this way of making people feel like they mattered. You know, didn't matter if you were a CEO or a janitor. She treated everyone the same. Sounds like a special woman. She was used to bring home stories about her patients, not the medical stuff, but the human stuff. The businessman who cried when his wife held his hand. The teenager who learned to walk again after a car accident. She said people show you who they really are when they're scared or hurting. During dinner, Sam got another phone call. This time he stepped outside onto the terrace to take it. When he came back, he had this satisfied look on his face, like a cat who'd caught a particularly fat mouse. "Good news?" I asked. "You could say that. Turns out my property manager's been hearing some interesting complaints from other tenants in Victoria's building. Seems there's been some unusual activity in their offices lately. People working odd hours, shredding a lot of documents." I felt something shift in my chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. What kind of unusual activity? Well, the cleaning crew noticed that Victoria's been staying late a lot lately, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. And the security guards mentioned several visits from people who didn't sign in properly. Cash payments for overtime that weren't authorized by the partners. That doesn't sound good, it gets better. Turns out the SEC has been asking questions about some of their recent trades. Specifically trades that happened right before major corporate announcements. The kind of timing that's either incredibly lucky or incredibly illegal. I thought about what those young lawyers had said earlier. How do you know all this? Sam smiled. When you own the building, you hear things. Security reports cross my desk. Maintenance requests tell stories. And when federal investigators start asking your building manager about tenant activity, you pay attention. Federal investigators? SEC's been sniffing around for 3 months now. Something about insider trading patterns. Seems someone's been sharing confidential client information with outside parties. Information that's been very profitable for certain traders. The pieces started falling into place. You're saying Victoria's involved in this. I'm saying the evidence suggests someone at her firm is feeding information to traders. And guess who handles most of their corporate merger cases? What do we do with this information? Sam leaned back in his chair, watching the other guests laugh and toast and celebrate. We make sure the right people see it. I've got a friend who works with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He's very interested in what we've found so far. So far, Vince, my friend, this is just the beginning. Your daughter-in-law has been playing a dangerous game, and it's about to catch up with her. I looked across the room at the head table where Victoria was smiling and accepting congratulations from the other guests. She looked so confident, so untouchable. But for the first time since I'd walked into this place, I felt like maybe I wasn't as powerless as I'd thought. What happens next? Next, we make sure justice gets served. The legal way, the right way. The next week, Sam and I met for coffee at a diner near the old Dearborn plant. The kind of place where they still served coffee in thick white mugs and the waitress called you honey. Sam brought along a manila folder thick with papers and photographs. "What's all this?" I asked, sliding into the red vinyl booth across from him. Evidence, public records, SEC filings, some very interesting patterns in Victoria's client trades. He spread out several documents across the scratched Formica table. "See, here's the thing about being a landlord, Vince. You hear things, security guards talk, cleaning crews notice stuff. And when federal investigators start asking questions about one of your tenants, you pay real close attention. Federal investigators? SEC's been building a case for 4 months now. Something about insider trading connected to several major corporate mergers. Seems someone's been sharing confidential client information with outside parties." Sam pointed to a series of trade records. "Look at these dates. Every single one of these trades happened 24 to 48 hours before major announcements that moved stock prices. I studied the papers, lots of numbers and legal terms I didn't fully understand, but the pattern was clear as day. You're saying Victoria's involved in this. I'm saying the evidence suggests someone at her firm is feeding information to traders. And guess who's been the lead attorney on every single one of these merger cases? What do we do with this information?" Sam smiled and pulled out his phone. "We make sure the right people see it. I've got a friend who works with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, Special Agent Maria Rodriguez. She's very interested in what we've found. Over the next month, things started happening fast. The local business journal ran a front-page story about the SEC investigation into Sinclair and Associates. The headline read, "Prominent Detroit law firm under federal scrutiny. Client after client pulled their accounts. The firm's biggest corporate clients started distancing themselves, afraid of guilt by association." I watched it all unfold from my kitchen table, reading the morning paper with my coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The kind of justice that comes when people face real consequences for their actions. Victoria came to see me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working in Helen's old garden trying to keep her roses alive when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. When I looked up, Victoria was standing there in her expensive suit, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Vincent, we need to talk," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I set down my pruning shears and stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. "About what?" "Don't play games with me. I know you're behind this somehow. You and that Mitchell character from the wedding." I looked at her standing there in my backyard, where Helen and I had planned our future, where Greg had learned to ride his bike. Behind what, Victoria? This investigation, this media circus. Ever since your friend showed up at the wedding, my career's been falling apart. Clients are leaving, the partners are blaming me for bringing negative attention to the firm. That's interesting, I said, genuinely meaning it. Tell me, Victoria, did you do what they're saying you did? Her silence was louder than any confession. Because if you did, I continued, then maybe you should be talking to a criminal defense attorney instead of me. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The expectations, my father's reputation, my family's standing in the community. No, I understand pressure just fine. I worked 35 years in a factory to support my family, but I never stole from anyone to do it. Her face flushed red. It wasn't stealing, it was just information. No one got hurt. Nobody got hurt. I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Victoria, you put my son in the back row of his own son's life because you were ashamed of where he came from. You made him choose between his wife and his father. That hurt plenty. This isn't about the seating arrangement at the wedding. No, it's not. It's about respect. It's about remembering that the person who raised your husband deserves better than being treated like an embarrassment. 2 weeks later, the State Bar Association suspended Victoria's license pending a full investigation. The Sinclair family firm quietly dissolved, with the other partners scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Richard Sinclair announced his retirement from all professional activities. Patricia canceled her charity commitments. Greg called me that night. His voice sounded different. Younger somehow, like the kid who used to run into the house after school, excited to tell me about his day. Dad, I need to apologize. For what, son? For everything. For letting her treat you like that at the wedding. For choosing her side when I should have stood up for you. For forgetting who raised me. I sat down in Helen's old recliner, the one I'd been meaning to replace for years but couldn't bring myself to. You don't have to choose sides, Greg. You just have to remember that respect isn't something you can buy or inherit. It's something you earn every day. I know that now. Victoria, she's been lying to me about a lot of things, not just the business stuff. She told me you wouldn't want to be seated with her family because you'd feel uncomfortable around successful people. Said you'd asked to be placed somewhere quieter. Did you believe that? I wanted to. It was easier than confronting her about what was really happening. The local news ran a follow-up story about the whole scandal. They interviewed some of Victoria's former clients, talked about the millions of dollars in illegal profits, mentioned the family connections and social standing. At the end, they had a quote from a federal prosecutor. This case shows that no one is above the law regardless of their family name or social position. Sam and I were having lunch at that same diner when the story came on the TV mounted in the corner. The sound was turned down, but we could read the headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Feel better? Sam asked, cutting into his meatloaf. Not about revenge, if that's what you mean. But yeah, I feel like the truth came out that matters to me. What about Victoria? She's facing federal charges. Could be looking at 5 to 10 years if they convict her on all counts. That's between her and the justice system now, and Greg, he's been coming around more. Brings my grandson over on weekends. Kids learning to use tools, help me fix things around the house. Reminds me of Greg at that age. Sounds like things are working out. Helen always said that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. Sometimes it just takes a while to find the surface. 6 months later, Greg threw a party for my 59th birthday. Nothing fancy, just family and a few neighbors at his house. But here's the thing that mattered. I sat at the head of the table, not because anyone made a big deal about it, but because that's where Greg put my chair. Right where the man who raised him belonged. Dad, Greg said, raising his beer bottle. I want to say something. The room got quiet. My grandson Tommy, who's 6 now, stopped playing with his toy cars to listen. I spent too many years trying to be someone I wasn't. Trying to fit into a world that told me where I came from wasn't good enough. But I learned something important recently. The man who taught me how to work with my hands, how to fix things when they break, how to keep my word, that man raised me right. And I'm proud to be Vincent Patterson's son. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had to clear my throat before I could speak. Your mother would have liked hearing that, I managed to say after dinner. Greg pulled me aside in his garage. He'd been working on an old Mustang, the kind of project we used to do together when he was a teenager. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about earning respect instead of inheriting it. I want to teach Tommy those values, the ones you taught me before I forgot them. You never forgot them, son. You just got distracted for a while. Victoria's lawyer says she'll probably get 18 months in federal prison. Plea bargain to avoid the bigger charges. How do you feel about that? Greg wiped his hands on a shop rag thinking, honestly, I feel bad for her, but I also feel like I can breathe again. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Your mother used to say that living with lies is like carrying a bag of rocks. Eventually, you have to set it down. What about you, Dad? Are you okay with how everything turned out? I looked around Greg's garage, tools hanging neatly on pegboard, just like I'd taught him. A workbench covered with the kind of honest mess that comes from actually fixing things instead of just talking about it. I'm more than okay. I'm proud. Sam and I still meet for coffee every Tuesday at that same diner. Two old guys who figured out that success isn't about the size of your office or the cost of your suit. Last week he brought me some news. Vince, I've got a proposition for you. I'm listening. I'm starting a scholarship fund for kids from working class families who want to go to trade schools. Good kids who know how to work but need help with tuition. I want to call it the Helen Patterson Memorial Scholarship. I had to set my coffee cup down because my hands started shaking. Sam, that's beautiful, but why Helen? Because from what you've told me about her, she understood something that gets forgotten these days, that honest work has dignity, that taking care of people matters, that you don't have to apologize for where you come from. She'd have loved that. What do you need from me? Help me pick the recipients. You know what to look for in people, the kind of character that can't be taught in schools. The first scholarship recipient was a young woman named Maria Santos. 19 years old, wanted to become an electrician like her father. Her essay talked about watching him rewire houses after his regular job, saving money for her education. When we called to tell her she'd won, she cried on the phone. My dad's going to be so proud, she said. He always told me that working with your hands is working with your heart. That night, I sat in Helen's garden with a beer, watching the sun go down behind the neighbor's fence. Her roses were blooming better than they had in years. Maybe because I'd finally learned to tend them properly, or maybe because some things just take time to grow right. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg.
Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad. Love you. I typed back. Never crossed my mind, son. The truth is, I'd thought about giving up plenty of times over the years.
When Helen got sick and the medical bills piled up, when the plant closed and I had to figure out what came next. When Greg started drifting away and I didn't know how to reach him. But Helen always said that giving up is just another word for quitting before the story's finished, and our story wasn't finished. It was just getting to the good part. A few weeks later, I got an invitation in the mail, heavy paper, fancy script. Patricia Sinclair was hosting a charity event for underprivileged children, and she wanted me to attend as an honored guest. The note was handwritten. Mr. Patterson, I owe you an apology that's long overdue. Your family's dignity was never in question. My daughter's judgment was, I hope you'll accept this invitation as a small step toward making amends. Patricia Sinclair, I called Sam to ask what he thought. Are you going? I don't know. Part of me wants to say no, just on principle. What would Helen do? I thought about it. Helen, who never held a grudge but never forgot a lesson. Helen, who believed people could change if they really wanted to. She'd go, she'd say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about not letting what happened keep controlling your life. Sounds like you have your answer. So I went, wore my good suit, the one Greg bought me for Christmas. Sat at a table with people who actually wanted to talk to me, not because of who I knew or what I owned, but because they'd heard about the scholarship fund and wanted to help. At the end of the evening, Patricia came over to thank me for coming. Mr. Patterson, I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman for her mistakes. Mrs. Sinclair, forgiveness isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn, but it sounds like you're working on it. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Your son is lucky to have you as a father. I'm lucky to have him as a son. Driving home that night, I thought about how strange life can be, how the worst day can turn into the beginning of the best year, how losing your dignity can teach you what it's really worth. The factory may have closed down, but the lessons I learned there about honest work, about standing up for what's right, about loyalty to the people who matter, those lessons are still worth something. Worth enough to pass on to my grandson anyway. And sometimes, justice takes its time, but finds its way home eventually. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better and watching the truth do the heavy lifting. Dignity isn't something someone can take from you at a wedding table. It's something you choose to keep or give away every single day.